Hi everyone, it's me, Krylios, Team Rayceen Productions MC and producer. And joining me today is Cyrée Jarelle Johnson. Thanks for joining me today, Cyree. How are you?
All right, I just moved, so I tried my best to make sure you couldn't see it in my background.
Listen, I get that. I just moved as well. I just moved just a few weeks ago. So it's definitely an adjustment, especially
Yeah.
moving in a time like this. Now, as a matter of fact, tell me about that. How was that for you?
It wasn't great. It's probably the worst move of my life. Yeah, I had to move because of some transphobic harassment in my building. So
Oh.
it was very sudden and very
Hmm.
expensive because I live in New York. But now it's very done, and I
Wow.
have very good natural light, which is,
Yes. Oh,
you
we
pay a
love
premium
that.
for that. So,
We
I'm
love
glad to be
that.
sitting in this sunshine, which was not possible in my last apartment. So that's all good.
Oh, wonderful. And your skin is glowing. I am
Thank
living for
you.
it.
Black
And
soap.
yes, yes.
Some
And
shade.
you're an author, you are a literary, God to me, I
Oh
guess.
gosh, that's too kind.
You know, but you just touched on something that I want to talk about a little bit first before we get, more into your literary achievements. And that's the transphobia. And I know for many people that's very surprising in a place like New York City that
Yes.
could become a problem. Tell me about that. How's that been for you?
I feel like I live in a really interesting intersection because I think that cis people generally respond to my gender in really visceral ways, but then in my everyday life, when like say, like there are the cis dudes who on Grindr are like,
Mhm.
I saw you on the train, right? That's a whole other thing, right? But then there are like, the cis guys that I interact with in person who are like, you don't look like what I would like you to look like, right?
Mm.
In this case, it was I think people were responding more to my gender nonconformity than
Mm.
whatever gender I personally might say, like, this is me, right?
Yeah.
And so, it culminated in like actual harassment that happened to me inside of my home, like while I was
Mm.
just watching Netflix, trying to heal from a cold, you
Wow.
know what I mean? And it happened uh, twice over the course of a year. And I had to say to myself, when I think about trans men who unfortunately lose their lives, it's very frequently close to home, and it very
Mhm.
frequently happens with groups of men. And in those cases,
Mm.
that was sort of the setup at my old building. And so I was just like, hey, it might not happen, but like
Yeah.
it only takes a second for you to lose your life. And that's always something that's really close to my heart in every gender that I have ever embodied or half lived in.
Mhm.
The reality is that I've faced violent harassment my whole life, or at least since I was 13, 14.
Mhm.
So when I think about conceptions of gender, like that is really a primary part of my own gender. It's just that, like,
Yeah.
regardless of what I think about myself, I am always somebody who is targeted for violence.
Oh.
And I think that transphobia is really just one of those kinds of violences. But sometimes when you're getting like harassed on the street, you can't always. I mean, I'm tall, especially like I would say, or taller for a trans guy.
Mhm.
I'm 5'9", and so sometimes I'm just being taken for a femme cis guy, right? So like but
Ah.
like it's not like that excuses me from violence. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course not.
right?
Definitely. Of
No,
course.
like however you perceive it, or whatever you think you're seeing,
Yeah,
it's not safe for me. So
definitely.
and then the fact that I am gay, right, like that just adds
Mhm.
another kind of level of, I experience the same violence that all gay men experience,
Yeah,
and
of
on top of
course.
that I am a gender nonconforming person and a trans person.
Mhm.
So I think that all of those things kind of
Intersections, yeah.
exactly, yeah.
So tell me something. Tell me how your queerness and your trans masculinity influence your writing. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it was really interesting winning a Lammy this year. I was like, I did not expect it.
Congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
Congratulations for your Lambda Literary Award. That is amazing. Congrats
Yeah,
on that. Yes.
yeah, for sure. I'm very pleased about it, and thankful and grateful to have this opportunity. But it was really difficult for me to pick a category, and mostly because they're not mutually exclusive, right? Like
Mhm.
I am a trans author, but I am also a gay author,
Yeah.
and so thinking about where my book fit and like what the right category was during nomination for a lot of different things was very difficult, because I knew that if I put it in a gay category, then it would be cis men and me, or, you know, not trans men at the very least, even if it isn't only cis men. And if I put it in, you know, the trans category, I worried that it would be, and this isn't always the case. I think it's less the case with the trans category as we go on, like straight people's work about, you know, and I worried about that too. I will also say that the Lammy has a history of not putting trans women's books in the trans poetry category. And I feel like that's just, that was part of the reason that I didn't submit in that category. Like, I feel like it's artificial if you're not nominating, you know, the best books, that you're just, you know, nominating the best books written by trans masculine people, non-binary people who are, you know, not trans feminine people. So I think that that's, you know, unfair. So that category feels unfairly rigged. Like, I mean, J. Dodd is on my pressmate, and she wrote an amazing book. So where was she in that category? You know, so like there's already something going on there, and that was part of it. But also, I mean, if anyone has read my work, I mean, it's gay work. You know what I mean? It's like work about men who love men and have sex with other men. And so, you know, at the end of the day, I had to ask myself, is this a book about my body or about my transition, or is it a book about being a man among men, and or you know, albeit non-binary, but you know, like definitely, it was that book. It was gay, and so that's where I put it. I think, you know, Slingshot is part of a trilogy, and so it's part one of a trilogy where it's not the exact same characters every time, but they all operate with an unnamed trans protagonist. And so the second book, I'm hard at work at the second book in the series, and it's called Psychedelica. So whereas Slingshot started out thinking about protest and what we owe to each other, and also just being, you know, an upwardly, quote unquote, upwardly mobile person who does not come from privilege, you know, classic privilege. And what you owe to the folks that you've known your whole life versus what you want for yourself, and like how, you know, so many of these political scenes and also movements are run by middle-class people who've been middle-class their entire life.
Definitely,
And so they don't have the same obligations to family and community, and also they don't have the same associations with people. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have to do the same kind of support as people who were raised poor and working class. And I think that it shows in the politics that you're allowed to have, and also the company that you keep. And so I really wanted to kind of look at that, like where, and I also really in Slingshot wanted to look at a family that breaks down, not because the child is queer or the child is trans, but because of some other shit. And I think that doesn't happen enough in Black gay stories, right? Like, if there is a problem between a mother and child,
it's always that. You know, and I get that 100%, because you know, I write a lot too, and right now, especially in my writing, you know, my parents' marriage, you know, has broken down and stuff like that, and it had nothing to do with the fact that I'm gay. Me being a gay, though, still was a problem, but that was not, but that was not the thing that broke it down. And so I think stories like that has to be, you know, have to be told as well. And it's really amazing what you're doing and the work that you're putting out, because you know, so many people like us really connect to stories like those because we relate to them. Many of us have gone through the same thing, and sometimes, you know, we probably may not go through the exact same thing, but similar things. And you know, those stories deserve to be told, not just the white middle class family, you know, type of stories. And it's really, really amazing what you are doing with the work that you're doing.
Thank you. And not only the Black middle class kind of stories too, you know what I mean? Like, I remember there was such little representation when I was a young person, especially I'm from New Jersey. And so like, I would say queer and trans communities, they just like look different. And then I ended up going to school at Hampshire, which was as different as it could be. It was just like white culture. Even if you were Black, it was just white culture, right? So like the people who I knew and composed, even like thinking about gender nonconformity, right? Like, I'm queer swan, so my mother is queer, and I was raised in, you know, like lesbian community. And although she is bisexual, she's queer, she's a bisexual person. But I was still raised in lesbian community, and so the gender nonconforming people that I knew were aggressives and studs, and so and I had a parent who was aggressive. So that kind of gender nonconformity did not necessarily. There were other kinds of gender nonconformity, but that phrasing did not really exist at Hampshire. And so like thinking about how to find people who had similar experiences to myself, it wasn't possible. It wasn't really possible. And so I think that Slingshot, especially because it's my first book, kind of like wrestles with that, right? Like you look at like the conversations that people are having now about he, him lesbians, and thinking about a character like Asar, right? Like where it's just like Asar's gender is not easily categorizable, right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and while like you know, the protagonist, I think that while his gender may be easily categorizable to himself, I don't know that he's always perceived in that way. So I think that it is kind of a complicated book about being gay, and it's been very interesting to see what cis gay men take from it and the ways that they feel about it.
Okay,
They
listen.
be feeling ways.
And I love it, and it's really this thing of, you know, what the current queer experience is like, and really exploring gender and the gender spectrum, and the fact that gender really is this, you know, very nebulous, very personal, you know. And I just love seeing the way how, you know, especially now in today, people are really exploring that and really being given the space to be able to explore it and to parse it and to really, you know, get into it, into the nitty gritty. Because for many people, many cis people, whether they're straight or, you know, they're cis and queer, they don't really understand the concept. And some people, they still are, you know, beholden to the traditional gender roles and traditional gender structures and how they understand gender. And, you know, you have a way of, you know, basically destabilizing that structure, you know, deconstructing it, as they say, you know, gender is a construct, tear it apart. That's what you do. You just, and I love it, and I love it, and mixing it as well with sexuality and the way how that works. Oh my God, you know, it's really intriguing. It's like the queer pinnacle is the queer literary pinnacle, you know.
You are very kind. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate having the opportunity to write about identity in these ways. But I think that sometimes identity gets constructed away from all the things that made it, right? You know, like I think that part of the reason, like I think it's very interesting to me because most of the people I meet are raised by straight people, right?
Yeah.
And certainly most of the trans people I meet are raised by straight people. Not all of them, certainly not all of them, but you know, a good amount of them.
Yeah.
And you know, my expectations for gender were very different growing up than other people, and I think that that's partially why I grew into the person that I am. You know what I mean? Like if I had a straight man woman pair, although I later, you know, did, my mother ended up partnering with like a man TM who had very specific opinions about what it meant to be a man, and like, but then, you know, like thinking about my like aggressive parent, like so did she, you know what I mean? Like she wanted me to be able to put together models of the family car and play basketball and want to wear Dockers and like women, right? So like thinking about what it means to just like not fit well, you know what I mean? Like whether you're whoever you are. And I think that a lot of different kinds of people, whether they be trans or cis, whether they're, you know, gay or, you know, not, or like have experiences with just not fitting in well. And you know, being liked, right? Like my stories, like our stories in Slingshot are not about being disliked. They're just about being very different and like an assimilatable kind of difference. And I grew up in the church, right? I grew up both in the gay church and in African Methodist Episcopalian church. And right, like if you stick out like a sore thumb, you stick out like a sore thumb. And in those environments, you know, like you just have to learn how to be authentically yourself or else you will be crushed.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
Yeah, and you might not make it out alive. You know what I mean? Like, I think that anyone who was raised in the church like that, you know, like in the church a couple of days, like that was their social activity, can remember people who were different and how they were treated and what they did to survive. And, you know, in a space like that, I'm from a pretty small town too. And so the church was made by, you know, my grandmother and my great grandmother were founding members of the church.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and you know, so it was like the thing that they had put so much energy into in a small town, but like also because there were no, like my grandmother is unmarried, my great grandmother's husband had died long before I was born. You know, we were the family where there were no men, and my mother was, you know, because concepts of sexuality can sometimes be nebulous, right? Like was the lesbian. And so you know, it was very marked and very othered, but I was also a youth public speaker and I won a lot of awards through the church. So like you know, I always tried to counteract my real weirdness, right? Like the fact that I was different from other people with trying to be talented. And I think that that is more than anything is what Slingshot is about. And I think that that's actually something that brings me closer to a lot of cis gay men, right? Like where it's like,
Yeah.
I may be odd, but like also slightly better than you, and maybe as well. You know what I mean? And I think that that's a survival strategy for a lot of like queer and trans people is like, yeah, sure, like you might not like this thing about me, but like you need me for these things.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm lapping you in these other things. And I think that like while that sounds, especially as a disabled person, while that like does come off, you know, sometimes kind of smug, I think that some of that ego is what keeps people alive in situations.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I do agree. My goodness. This conversation with you is just so great. I really, really appreciate it. I want you to, let our audience know, one, how they can get Slingshot, when they can look out for the second installment, and how they can follow you and all of that. So go ahead and plug everything.
Absolutely. So you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at Cyrée Jarelle, CYREE JARELLE. You can find the rest of my writing at www.cyreejarellejohnson.com. And who knows when Psychedelica will be out, but I'm hard at work on it. You can get Slingshot a lot of different places, but I suggest you get it from Nightboat Books. States, keep in touch. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, it has been my pleasure. It has been my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
All right,
And
good one.
Thank you, you too. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Goodbye.